Right now, the most terrifying crisis in America is not happening in a bank or a boardroom. It is happening in the produce aisle of your local grocery store. You walk in and see rows of fresh lettuce, crisp broccoli, and bright orange carrots. You assume the supply chain is healthy. You assume the water is flowing. But that food is an illusion. It is the product of an agricultural empire that is physically running out of water right now. 2/3 of the winter vegetables consumed in the United States come from a single place, the Imperial Valley in California. It is a sprawling 700,000-acre miracle of human engineering, built directly in the middle of a ruthless desert, and it survives on a single lifeline called the Colorado River. But that lifeline is being choked off at the source. Sitting hundreds of miles upstream, Hoover Dam is barreling toward a catastrophic threshold that engineers call dead pool. The water in Lake Mead is dropping so low that the dam is about to stop functioning entirely. When that happens, the water stops moving. The turbines stop spinning. The lights go out for 25 million people, and the water that feeds the Imperial Valley stops flowing. We built the entire American food supply on a river that is dying, and the desert is finally coming to take it all back. There is a drive you can take out of Las Vegas on Highway 93 that will tell you everything you need to know about what is happening to the American West. You head southeast through the desert, past the casinos and the sprawling suburbs, and then the land drops away. You are looking down into Black Canyon. The first thing you notice is not the massive concrete dam. It is the line. It runs along both walls of the canyon from one end to the other, a white chalk scar cutting across miles of dark red rock. Mineral stains left behind as the water pulled away year by year, foot by foot, for more than 2 decades. That white ring rises taller than a 10-story building. You can see it from space. You can see it from the Las Vegas Strip on a clear day. It is the biggest watermark of a water crisis anywhere on Earth, and it has been growing since before most people started paying attention. That line is Lake Mead telling you exactly how much it has lost. At full capacity, Lake Mead holds roughly 26 million acre-feet of water. 1 acre-foot is enough to keep 2 average American homes running for an entire year. When the lake is full, the water sits at 1,221 feet above sea level. Today, even after a few decent snow seasons in the Rocky Mountains, the lake sits somewhere around 1,070 feet. That is still roughly 140 feet below where it is supposed to be. A lake that was built to hold 9 full years of Colorado River flow now holds closer to 2. In recent years, the water level fell to its lowest since the lake was first filled, back in the 1930s. It pushed closer to dead pool than at any point in its 90-year life. Dead pool is exactly 895 feet. That is the elevation where water can no longer flow through Hoover Dam on its own. No pressure means no movement. No movement means no power. And no power means no water supply for 25 million people spread across 7 states. The dam generates electricity through hydraulic head. Water falls from the surface of the lake through massive intake towers, dropping hundreds of feet through giant pipes and slamming into turbines at the base of the dam. The higher the lake sits, the harder that water hits, and the more electricity those turbines push out into the grid. At full pool, Hoover Dam produces roughly 2,080 megawatts of electricity. That is enough to keep the lights on in over 1 million homes across Nevada, Arizona, and Southern California. For decades, that power was cheap, reliable, and taken completely for granted. Then the lake started dropping. Every single foot of lost elevation cuts the force driving those turbines. The power output has already fallen drastically. One of America's most critical power plants is running on backup equipment just to produce anything at all. To understand why this is happening, you have to understand the arrogant lie that built the American West. In November of 1922, leaders from 7 states gathered at a lodge in New Mexico to divide up the most valuable resource in the desert. The man running the table was Herbert Hoover. The idea seemed simple enough. Look at how much water the Colorado River carries every year, and split it fairly among the states that need it. Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. 7 states, 1 river. They looked at the flow records they had from the past few decades and divided up 16.5 million acre-feet per year. 7.5 million to the upper basin states, 7.5 million to the lower basin states, and another 1.5 million promised to Mexico by a later treaty. Everyone shook hands, everyone went home satisfied, and they built an entire civilization on top of that agreement. There was just one massive problem. The flow data they used came from an unusually wet stretch of history. The late 1800s and early 1900s saw some of the heaviest Colorado River flows in centuries. A rare cluster of high water years made the river look far bigger and far more reliable than it actually was. They were not measuring the real river. They were measuring a fluke, and they wrote that fluke into law. Climate researchers later studied more than 1,000 years of tree ring data to find the true long-term average. What they found should have shaken every water manager in the country. The real average flow is closer to 12 or 13 million acre-feet per year. In dry years, it carries less than 10 million acre-feet. The compact had promised 25 to 30% more water than the river has ever truly been able to deliver. We built cities, farms, power grids, and entire ways of life directly on top of a promise the river could never keep. For decades, Lake Mead and Lake Powell masked the lie. The stored water covered the gap every year, but that cushion is almost gone now. And when a savings account finally hits zero, every shortfall shows up immediately. Stack a broken promise on top of the worst drought in recorded history, and you start to understand why engineers are now in a state of panic. This is not just a bad dry spell. Researchers have confirmed that the Colorado River Basin is caught in the worst mega drought in at least 1,200 years. It is the driest sustained stretch going back further than the founding of Oxford University. You have to go all the way back to the year 800 to find a dry period this long and this severe in the American Southwest. Even in a good snow year, more water leaves the system than enters it. The math does not work. It has never worked, and it is getting worse. Every time a decent winter brings heavy snow to the mountains, people exhale. The water level creeps up a few feet, and the headlines immediately call it a recovery. Politicians point to the rising numbers as proof the system is resilient. Do not believe the headlines. A 30-foot rise in a lake that is still 140 feet below full is not a recovery. It is a pause. The white ring on the canyon walls keeps climbing because the math underneath that temporary rise has not changed at all. The water came back just enough to make people stop asking the right questions. The entire river basin is caught in a compounding water debt. The rain stops, the sun comes out, and the river immediately resumes its brutal slide toward the bottom. As this catastrophe continues to unfold, the authorities are quietly hoping you do not notice the crumbling foundation beneath our food supply. If you want to stay informed on these hidden environmental threats that the mainstream media constantly ignores, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Leave a like and drop a comment on this video to help us spread this crucial information. Your engagement is the only way we can push these vital warnings past the algorithm and reach the people who need to hear them before the water completely runs out. The crisis at Lake Mead is not an abstract problem on a chart. It has already arrived for thousands of families who had less money, and less political pull than the massive cities downstream. In Pinal County, Arizona, about an hour south of Phoenix, farming families watched their water disappear almost overnight. The Central Arizona Project Canal carries Colorado River water across miles of open desert to reach farms and cities. When the federal government finally declared a massive shortage, Pinal County farmers were among the very first to lose their allocation. They held the lowest priority water rights in the state, which meant they were first in line to take the cut. Fields that had grown crops for generations went dry almost immediately. Hundreds of acres of green turned into cracked, brown earth. Farmers tried to pivot to groundwater pumping, but the underground aquifers recharge far too slowly. They are losing water from above through absent rainfall, and losing water from below through accelerating aquifer depletion. Pinal County was the canary in the coal mine, showing the rest of the country exactly what happens when the river stops keeping its promises. Desperate to hold the system together, the federal government and the states have spent somewhere around $6 billion on emergency fixes. But one project stands above all the rest as the single most audacious piece of emergency engineering in the Southwest. It is called the third straw. Las Vegas realized early on that it was heading toward a cliff. So the city spent $1.4 billion drilling a tunnel 3 miles long, straight through solid volcanic rock deep beneath the bed of Lake Mead. They built an intake valve at an elevation of 860 feet, well below the original pipes. It took 7 years of brutal underground construction to reach water that no drought could touch. By recent years, it was the only reason water still came out of the tap in a city of over 2 million people. But the third straw does not fix the river. It just lets Las Vegas drink from the bottom of a shrinking glass. When the lake hits dead pool at 895 feet, even the deepest tunnel reaches its limits. Las Vegas bought time, but it did not buy a solution. Meanwhile, Lake Powell, the second largest reservoir in the country, sits hundreds of miles upstream on the Utah and Arizona border. It has been following the exact same downward path as Lake Mead. In recent years, the Bureau of Reclamation had to make emergency water releases from reservoirs in Wyoming, more than 400 miles upstream, just to keep the Glen Canyon Dam above its minimum operating level. Two of the biggest man-made lakes in America were both in crisis simultaneously, and the federal government was frantically moving water from one sinking ship to another, calling it resource management. The entire system is connected, and it is failing at the exact same time. All of this brings us back to the Imperial Valley, 700,000 acres of desert farmland that relies completely on the continuous flow of the Colorado River. California consumes more Colorado River water than any other single state, and the Imperial Valley takes the massive lion's share of that allocation. At Dead Pool, the water stops flowing through the dam. The river dries up before it reaches the California border. 70% of America's winter vegetables are grown in this valley, and they simply disappear from the supply chain. The lettuce, the broccoli, the carrots, the spinach, all of it disappears from store shelves and markets. You cannot grow food in the desert without a constant, artificial supply of water. The moment that water stops, the desert reclaims the land. The crops will wither in the sun within days. The economic shockwave will be instantaneous. When 2/3 of the winter produce vanishes, the prices of whatever food remains will skyrocket. A water emergency in the remote southwestern desert becomes a devastating inflation crisis in every grocery store in the country. Working families from New York to Florida will be priced out of basic fresh food. Restaurants will pull items from their menus. The trucking companies that transport the produce will lose their freight, triggering massive layoffs. We built an entire global economy on the arrogant assumption that the Colorado River would always be there to carry the weight. We treated it like a permanent highway of endless water. But you cannot negotiate with physics. For over a century, politicians have held meetings, signed treaties, and poured billions of dollars into concrete monuments to human hubris. They engineered the riverbanks, but they forgot to engineer the sky. The Colorado River is dying. The ghost structures of sunken towns are emerging from the drying mud of Lake Mead. World War II landing crafts and forgotten secrets are rising to the surface as the water vanishes. The $6 billion in emergency gambles bought us a few extra years. But the gap between what the river carries and what 25 million people demand has not closed. The mega drought is still running. The white ring on the canyon walls keeps climbing, 1 foot at a time, marking every year of delay like a massive scar cut into the rock. 895 feet is not a prediction anymore. It is a direction. The river does not care about our supply chains. The desert does not care about our grocery stores. The water is leaving. And the only question that matters now is what comes next when the food simply stops growing.